appreciate you joining us today for this topic. This is a very, we see this topic coming up more and more as we go out and work with clients to set up storerooms, where more and more companies are going to an unmanned storeroom environment. So we thought this would be a timely topic to talk about today. So to get the conversation started, I thought I might first need to just define what I mean by self-serve storeroom. A self-serve storeroom, in our mind, is a process where a technician or a mechanic can gain access to the inventory and issue a part to themselves against a work order without the direct assistance of a storeroom attendant. Well, that might sound simple enough, but the one key thing, the distinction I want to make here right up front, is that a self-serve storeroom, while it may be unmanned, does definitely not mean it's unmanaged. That environment is still managed, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And Rona, did you already do this particular poll question?
Yes, we did, Dan. Just to let you know, 26% say that they're currently running a self-serve storeroom. 14% say they decided to install one, looking for a plan. 22% say they're in the process of setting one up as we speak. 27% say they're trying to decide whether or not to do so. And 11% say they've not considered it.
Okay, very good. Very good. I appreciate that. So interesting cross-section of where everyone is here in the audience in terms of deciding whether to do it or being in the process. So hopefully this is timely information for you. So there are many reasons, I'm sure, that a company might decide to go to a self-serve storeroom, and here's a couple of common examples that we hear where you might be in a situation where you're losing the storeroom attendant. Maybe this person has been there for many, many years, and now he's retiring, and the company's decided not to replace that position anymore. So, or the company has decided to really take a serious look at spare parts inventory as a way to drive more costs out of the business, but there's really no money in the budget to staff the storeroom fully. So you may still be considering whether or not to go toward that, but if the issue hasn't been decided already, I would offer this general recommendation from our experience seeing many storerooms over the years, some successful and some not. And just a general rule, if you have a lot of inventory, say over $1 million or so of MRO spare parts inventory, and or you manage a lot of critical spares that would shut you down if you had the lack of that part, a well-trained storeroom attendant and process will often pay for themselves in purchasing cost avoidance and downtime avoidance. So if you're dealing with a large asset, then that's a consideration. But certainly if staffing the storeroom just isn't an option for you, then these are some things that we'd recommend doing. First of all, communicate right away. Right from the very start. It's just imperative to communicate, communicate, communicate. As we all know, the grapevine travels so much faster than we could ever communicate, so it makes it critical to start communicating right away. Unhealthy rumors and misinformation will put you miles behind if those facts and the actual plan don't match up with the rumor. So start early and keep on communicating is our advice. You want to seek buy-in and commitment from everyone involved to ensure that they'll be an active and faithful participant in paving the way ahead, not naysayers or deterrents. I can't overstate this. This is so important to get people on board with the process so that you'll be able to sustain it once you build the environment and the process. So realize that you probably won't make believers out of everyone. And some people are just staunchly going to refuse to embrace the change. It just never fails. In this case, remember that the cost of mismanaging your inventory will usually outweigh the cost of training 1 or 2 new employees. So you may need to be prepared to offer the naysayers a different career opportunity. And then I would say once you've begun to establish and communicate, it's important early on to designate a process owner. This is the person that's going to be, you know, the owner of the process, the manager of the process. So, you know, think of it in terms of a convenience store. Think of 7-Eleven down the street where you stopped potentially this morning to top off your gas tank this morning. You probably swiped your card and pumped your own gas. And then you might have noticed that your windshield was dirty, so you grabbed the squeegee from the windshield wash bucket and the paper towel, and you brought that windshield, you know, to a sparkling shine. And then the pump nozzle clicks off and signals that your tank is full, and you put the nozzle back in the pump. Then the pump prints your receipt, and you continue on your way down the road to work. So you did that all by yourself, right? You didn't need anyone to help you with this at all. But let me ask you a question. Who made sure there was gas in the underground holding tank? Who made sure there was water in the washer fluid in the wash bucket, or paper in the paper towel dispenser? My point is that someone was working behind the scenes to make sure that your stop at 7-Eleven went smoothly, weren't they? And I think the same applies to a self-serve storeroom. So we think of it in terms of, yes, a person needs to be able to access the inventory and issue themselves a part, but that doesn't mean there's a lot of good processing and management going on behind the scenes to make sure that they're successful when they do that. So designate a process owner. This is the person that very oftentimes they're directly involved in building the inventory management process itself. They're responsible for monitoring process compliance. They have the authority to either the people report directly to this person, or at least a dotted line to hold technicians and end users accountable when redirections in behavior are needed. So, and then of course this is also the person that trains new users or retrains users if they need a refresher. So. And then this is also the person that's you know, behind the scenes doing periodic cycle counts or process audits and things like that. So that's a critical piece of your success, I think. And then once you really kind of along that process where you've identified a designated person, now if you don't already have robust tools, now's the time to get them. eMaint being a very robust CMMS system, but you know, as well, making sure that you're using technology to make that experience for the user as easy as possible. So if you look at the 7-Eleven this morning, you didn't write down how many gallons you got on a piece of paper. Even 7-Eleven depended on, I mean, if 7-Eleven depended on a piece of paper for you to tell them how much gas they use, how long would it be before their inventory was out of whack? So maybe, you know, hours or even minutes. It just would never last that way. So a solid tools, good software, good technology. Invest in the right software and hardware today, and your processes will have a lot better chance for success. So. And be aware, too, that the initial cost of setting up this environment, including the technology and the process and all, might be worth more than the annual payroll, actually, that you'd be saving by not staffing the storeroom for the first year. Just be aware of that. This can be, especially if there's storeroom consolidation and happening and things like that, you know, there's a significant upfront cost potentially, depending on what you're doing with the inventory. But don't let that stop you, because the savings, they'll come in the process of managing it well, and they'll come in the form of downtime reduction, process improvements, inventory reduction, and all the rest. So I think the next thing that we see often, which is a challenge for a lot of companies that want to go to a self-serve environment, is that the inventories very oftentimes they're spread across the facility or campus very oftentimes. So there might be 10, 12, 20 different storage locations where this inventory exists. So our recommendation is, as much as possible, consolidate all the inventory into one controlled space, or as few as humanly possible. It's a lot easier and less costly to monitor and manage one space than it is to try to manage a whole bunch of satellite areas that are spread across the plant. So one thought you might consider is install a security camera at the front door of the storeroom. Now, for some companies, security cameras can be a touchy subject, but there's an old management principle that says don't expect what you don't inspect. And let's face it, we're all human, so if we could be all counted on to do the right thing all the time, there wouldn't be any need for the 10 Commandments. So, you know, sometimes a camera, it's much less a matter of trust so much as it is just trying to help us manage our own human condition. You know, we're not perfect, are we? So consider a camera. Install a card access device, and definitely not keyed locks. What we find with the keyed locks is that a supervisor or whoever who's carrying the key will very oftentimes give the key to a technician, you know, just, oh, here's my key, you know, go ahead and get what you need. And then you have really no idea of who entered the room, unless you're using a camera, of course. But with a card access device, you have the ability to track exactly who went in the room, how long they were there, and so on. So, and how often they went into the room. Then, with that kind of information, the designated process owner can periodically, he or she can look at the entry log of who's coming into the room and compare that to the issue log from your CMMS software, from eMaint, and then compare, you know, how many times are they coming in and not issuing a part. We call that a null issues report. So if you see a lot of entries by an individual but no issues by that person in the system, you may want to check the security camera, or at the very least have a conversation with that person. It might be an inventory problem. Maybe he's coming into the storeroom and repeatedly and not finding what he needs. So that's a whole different problem. That's an inventory shortage. On the other hand, maybe he's needing to be retrained, or he's just flat forgetting to follow the process, so he needs to be reminded or retrained. So just some thoughts on consolidation. I think that's very important. Once the inventory is physically located where you're going to manage it from, and it's preferably a centralized location, then it's time to prepare the inventory itself. And this is kind of where we're talking about, you know, putting, you know, the 7-Eleven example, putting the paper towel in the dispenser and the fuel in the fuel tank. In this case, we're putting the fuel is quality inventory information into eMaint. And so building a high-quality item master so that a technician will be successful quickly trying to find a part in the system, and the very clear bin location numbering system where a person can be successful very quickly to scan a product, understand where it is physically, and be able to be on their way, get the part, and start turning a wrench. Beyond that, setting up min-max levels that are optimized based on actual usage information. So many of the places we go into are coming from a place where they really don't have adequate issue history, usage information. So it's kind of a best guess based on experience level being set. But I think the best scenario is once you begin to track that information through eMaint, you've got a quality inventory data database going in. You can then set those reorder points in such a way that somebody doesn't have to visually inspect all those bins to know what to replenish or not. That's what we're trying to get to, is a much more efficient replenishment process. Barcode labeling, of course, is a key to that. Not only the barcode of the item itself, but the location that it's going in. So when a person is putting it back on the shelf, they can scan the location it went into. So, and then really one of the last steps, as if you're transitioning from a completely unmanaged warehouse, a storeroom environment, which you would probably see half of the people we deal with anyway, are going from a completely unmanned, meaning unmanaged inventory environment, to now what they want to be a managed but still unmanned inventory environment. We need to do a complete physical count of that inventory to have a solid starting place. Okay? Rona, did you ask the second poll question as well, or no?
Actually, I haven't yet.
Okay. Well, here's the question. How would you grade your current inventory's readiness for setting up a self-serve storeroom? A, B, C, D, or are you failing at that? And Rona will initiate the poll.
Okay. So Dan is asking you to just give yourself a quick grade based on how you feel your preparedness is. A meaning you're well prepared, and F meaning you're not at all prepared, and B, C, and D being in the middle. So we're going back to school for a minute. All right, so just go ahead and let us know your responses. Looks like we have about 70% in, so I'll leave it open for a few more seconds. Okay. Good. All right. Let me go ahead and share the results. So, Dan, it looks like only 5% are saying they would grade themselves an A, 18% a B, 30% C, 31% D, and 16% say F. We're not yet prepared.
Not ready. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, very good. Thank you. Thank you for your input, everyone. And so, this is very timely for a lot of us here on the phone that are looking to initiate self-serve. So quality data is certainly a key. Once you've set up that quality data, and there are partners you can partner with, PM2 being one, to help you do that. Once you've done that, choosing quality partners to manage it overall is I think a key next step. At some point in the process, you may discover you need help in various points of the management piece. For example, your key suppliers. I'm sure that would be an interesting another poll question. Probably a high percentage, if I had to guess, of the people on the phone today have at least one supplier doing vendor-managed inventory, or maybe they've even put a dispensing machine in and things like that. And those are, I think, hugely valuable in the right application. Not everywhere, but when you have point-of-use needs right out on the plant floor, that you need to maintain that control and visibility, but you know, it's not in the central store, there may be some great applications. So picking key suppliers to help with that. One word of caution I would offer, though, on those kinds of things, those kinds of services provided by your suppliers, is that I would try to avoid falling into the trap of letting every distributor or supplier who thinks they can help you. This is a case where there's just too many chefs in the kitchen, and we've seen that become just ruin the soup. There's too many hands in the pie. So I would recommend focus on just a few select suppliers, if not one, who can provide the majority of what you buy and manage that inventory well and dependably. Another key you might think about is what are their financial motivations as well, meaning are they do they get paid for stocking your shelves, or are they paid to manage the inventory well? And so check what the distributor's motivations are, and that'll help manage your inventory levels as well. And then really, I think this is happening all along in the process as you begin to communicate. But once the system is completely set up and your system is the software and the processors are set up, then of course it's time to begin training your users. So by now, of course, we're talking about those motivated and committed employees that remain. The pessimists are gone. They've gone elsewhere by this point. So we want to, of course, train the users on the equipment and the process itself, talk about process ownership, what are the expectations, what is the process for holding each other accountable to the process, and then explain the compliance indicators. You know, hey, we have this thing we call the null issues report. Here's what it is. It's we periodically we will look to see how many times you come into the room, and we're going to compare that to how many times you issue a part. You know, let them understand what it is that the management is going to be doing, this designated manager, so that they can understand and comply. So it just, again, cannot be overstated that having a well-trained staff that is fully committed to your self-serve storeroom policies is absolutely critical to managing your inventory well. The old adage, just build it and they will come, just most definitely does not apply here. In other words, you can't just set up the storeroom and put a mobile device in the employee's hands and expect the process to just happen. Make sure that you have plans in place to properly enlist your people in the process and train them thoroughly, and you'll be much happier with the results. If you need help training, we're one company that offers that kind of training. We call it PM2 on Track. So that might be something that you want to outsource or do in-house. Either, of course, your call. But can't understate the importance of that. That was it for the formal presentation piece. At this point, I'd open it up to any questions at all.
All right, thanks so much, Dan. And again, if those of you that have questions, I have the phones on mute because we are recording today's session. We'll be sure to send a link to the recording to everyone who registered and who attended. And also, if at the end we'll have a little survey if you do want to get a copy of the PDF of the slides. And something, Dan, that you've talked about previously is something called a computer on wheels or a cow, and how those can be helpful in a self-serve storeroom. Can you go into that a little more for our listeners today?
Sure. There are some cases where maybe the company isn't quite ready to put a handheld device in every technician's hands. You might have 110, 150 technicians walking around, which would mean user licenses and all the rest, for not to mention the cost of the hardware to put in their hands. So one option that we've seen is, as opposed to just having a computer at the door of the storeroom with a computer and a barcode scanner, actually putting that computer on wheels. And what that allows you to do is scan the part, walk down the aisle with that computer. That's why they call it it's a cow, computer on wheels. And you've got the scanner right there, so you can scan the bin that has the barcode of the item, and without having to bring the part or bring the bin to the computer. So it's a way to just help users issue parts to themselves a lot easier without having to carry parts back and forth, even inside the storeroom. So we've seen that happen and be useful in other cases.
And Dan, you talked about barcoding and its importance, but do you think barcoding is absolutely essential to having a self-serve, or, in the absence of that, is it still possible to be successful with a self-serve storeroom?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think barcode is the silver bullet. Barcode, in the wrong process, a barcode just speeds the error rate. So the key is getting good information into the system. So a barcode merely makes it easier to get good information and accurate information into the system. The downside of not having a barcode is that now the technicians are going to be typing those item numbers into the system, so there's some certainly a higher degree of error there. So,
gotcha. One listener asked, are there systems that can help to manage the inventory as well as lead into ordering based on need to automatically generate requests when needed? And obviously, some of our listeners have eMaint where we know that function exists, but maybe you can, Dan, just talk a little bit about, in general, the systems and the kind of data you'll need to facilitate automatic replenishment.
Probably the most common combination of systems that we see, and I'll just use eMaint as an example, but there are many, where you have a CMMS such as eMaint that has the capability to manage reorder points and reorder quantities and generate a requisition. And then that information, or I should say generate a need, a reorder point, generate a reorder report, I guess you could say. And then that information is very oftentimes passed to the accounting software, whether it be SAP or PeopleSoft or you name it. So that's typically what we see. So it's a process of using the inventory management system to generate a reorder report, which then gets passed to your accounting system to generate a requisition and cut a purchase order. Is what we see. In the case of eMaint, I think the architecture, just my understanding of it, not being an eMaint technician, is that since it's a web-based system, that information goes to a server in the cloud, typically, where it's a think of it as a mailbox, if you will, and that data goes to the mailbox in the cloud, and then your accounting system goes on a periodic basis to go pull that information down, and that's how the information gets passed.
Correct, and essentially, just in the case of eMaint, when you establish a reorder point, we allow you to specify what do you want to have happen when inventory is issued, when an inventory transaction causes a part to go below that, and we essentially allow you to say you can generate an email, you can send an email out to the supplier, you can trigger a purchase order, you can do a variety of different actions that you get to specify, as you say, based on your system. Well, very good. In addition, Dan, you did talk about the null issues as being a great way to be able to, kind of have a means of validating and oversight. Are there other types of these compliance processes that you've seen being particularly effective?
Well, the one is just cycle counting. I think we want to make sure that whoever the designated process owner is, that you look at your we call it ABC items. So your very high moving items, your A, your B items are your less critical, slower moving, and your C are your very slow. And just having a process in place to periodically cycle count the items, particularly your A item list first and then B second, to just keep track of what your inventory accuracy is. I mean, ultimately, without a cycle count process in place, I think you're destined to wind up with an inaccurate inventory, even in a manned inventory environment. So cycle count process is, I think, critical regardless of you have a manned or an unmanned inventory storeroom.
And Dan, just to follow on to that, in your experience with cycle counting, do you want to share a best practice or two regarding how you determine frequency and criticality of parts? You know, I realize it kind of goes a little beyond the scope, but maybe there's a high-level tip or two that you can share with our listeners.
Yeah. Well, the criticality question is probably one that, you know, the chief engineers on the phone would know better. But those are the ones, those are probably very slow-moving parts, but they're critical to have on the shelf, obviously. So those you might consider A items if it's a short list. Typically, when we think of A, B, and C items, it's either the highest value or the highest and highest volume moving parts are your A items. And we would probably recommend, you know, counting your A items at least once a month, if not more often, depending on the usage. So you might have parts that are moving, you know, 10, 20 times a month, and they're important to have in stock, so I'd count those frequently. Your B items you might count once a quarter, and your C items you might count once or twice a year max. So just in terms of frequency, I think the key is, since this isn't a manned environment, you don't want to make a full-time job out of something that's supposed to be an unmanned environment. So we want to try to be wise about the amount of cycle counting time that we spend. Let's just count the things that are critical, and let that designate, that process owner, just do what's necessary to maintain the integrity of that inventory.
Okay. Wise thoughts. Here's a question from a listener, and I hope it can explain it clearly. He asks, how do you self-manage rotating parts like tooling, where they're transferred to and from different locations rather than issued? Does this difference mixed in with other parts that are issued cause any inaccuracies? So what are best practices to manage, I guess it's sort of inventory transfers in a self-managed environment? That's a very good question, I guess.
For tools, was the question tooling?
It did say rotating parts such as tooling, where, you know, they do get issued, but it's basically going to different storerooms.
Okay. Okay, so the
inventory moves, I guess, rather than just issues.
You know, if it's moving, if it's transferring parts from one point to the next, unless the volume of those moves is really high, I would probably think about letting the designate do those transactions. If the question is more around kind of check in, check out, I'm going to take a piece of tooling off the shelf, use it for a while, and then bring it back, then that might be a different scenario where you could actually use a check in, check out process, which I believe eMaint manages.
Yes.
And then there's the other option that you can actually apply automation, you know, physical hardware automation to that, in the form of lockers or actual carousels that also manage kind of a check-in, check-out process. So I'm taking this piece of the tooling off this machine, and that machine is the vending device, the dispensing device is going to ask me, where am I sending it to? What line or what machine am I sending it to? And then the system tracks it that way. So. But in the case of transfers, trying to move inventory from storeroom A to storeroom B or storeroom B to a particular line or something like that, I think I might actually want to have a centralized person doing that, if it were me.
Okay, those are handled differently than the self-serve. Okay. Here's another question from a listener who says the majority of their POs are automated. Does self-service tend to result in over-issues, you know, because of the convenience of getting a part, and then increase having excess inventory from eventual returns? Has that occurred in your experience? And if so, you know, are there ways to manage that or avoid that?
Well, in an unmanned environment, let's say, and very often as we go into a case like that where it's historically been unmanned, kind of an open environment, not really managed really at all. That's the culture. I'm going to take 5 of them because I don't know if it'll be here next week, the next time I come in. And so the person that orders them knows this is happening, so they order twice as many as they need. And I think the key here is to change that culture with good information. So I think that's the criticality of putting quality information into the system and then tracking it and then, you know, managing to it. So we should be, I think this is part of the Designate's responsibility as well. They should be, you know, looking at high usage items, and I know who's issuing these parts to themselves, and so looking for trends. Why is this an individual getting, you know, 10 of these every week and everybody else only gets 2? Another thing that I'd add to that, though, is depending on the part, depending on the kind of inventory, dispensing machines do a really good job of decreasing consumption. You know, things like gloves and, you know, personal protection equipment, those kinds of things, even batteries, things like that. They do a wonderful job of limiting consumption. So that's a thought you might also think about. If you're using, we go into paper plants as just an example, where a paper plant might be spending $100,000 in leather gloves a year. And when a vending solution gets applied and you begin to track usage of those gloves, consumption of those gloves just goes exponentially down, like in half or less. So you might think about that depending on the inventory that you're dealing with.
Interesting, just by tracking. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And someone asked, in an unmanned parts room, if you have a new part that's never been in inventory before that needs to come in or for receipts, is that still done by an individual? So if you can, even when you're in an unattended storeroom for issuing out parts, maybe you can elaborate a little on the receipt process in an unmanned environment.
Okay, and I think in my mind that is where the centralized designate comes into play as well. So that person is responsible for, again, maintaining the integrity of the standardized inventory data that you've built. So you really don't want individual users building parts because you know, over time that just integrity of that data is just going to degrade. So I would use a centralized designate for that as well.
Excellent. All right, thanks, Dan. Well, definitely, you know, I learned something in each of these sessions, and one big takeaway is, as you say, unmanned is not unmanaged, and it sounds like that you just need some different processes and a different way of managing. And all right, well, we're getting to the top of the hour, and I'd like to thank Dan for putting together this session, and thanks all of our listeners for joining us today. And again, we apologize that computer glitches happen, but thanks to all of you who did stay on the line with us, and thanks to Dan. His contact information is there if you, you know, he has a wealth of information, and for those of you that want to continue the dialogue. We will, when I end the webinar in a moment, I will have a survey. You can request a copy of the a PDF of the slides today, and we'll also send out a link to the recording, and I hope Dan comes back again. Let us know if there are other topics regarding inventory you'd like Dan to talk about, because he is such a wealth, he and PM2 are a wealth of information, help eMaint clients all the time. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, our listeners, and hopefully we'll see you the next time.
Thanks, everyone.
That's it. Take care.